Okay. Good morning, Jörg. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm great. It's a beautiful day, even though it's raining. But hey, who doesn't love a nice little shower in the summer?
Perfect. Well, it's very great to meet you today and talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing and what we can do to save the bees. Maybe we go ahead and introduce yourself first, a little bit about yourself, where you're currently at, and what brought you to be working with bees.
Yeah, my name is Jörg Meyer. I'm a full professor in the Department of Small Animal Medicine and Surgery, the Veterinary College at the University of Georgia. Oh, that's a mouthful. Uh, yeah, and I on a personal level, I've been kind of like a beekeeper for close to 20 years now. And professionally, I have started to include bees in the veterinary curriculum at UGA for about 4 or 5 years now. And this was all triggered by a recent legal change where in the past, before 2017, actually, beekeepers were able to go to any kind of food, agricultural food slash equipment supply store and purchase antibiotics to treat their beehives with. And eventually, it was recognized that this was like an one-off scenario because, as with all other food-producing species, you name it, poultry, cow, pigs, whatever you have on a farm, it is actually not allowed to purchase antibiotic and add them to their feed or to their drink water because obviously we keep those species to as their byproduct is usually enters the food chain. So either we have milk, we have meat, we have eggs. And what happens if these antibiotics are being used indiscriminatory, you can have residues of these antibiotics in those products that then enter the food chain. And we know now for quite a while that this actually can trigger the development or it aids in the development of multi-drug resistant bacterial strains. And that is a common problem that in human medicine they face, where people get infected by these strains, and actually no known antibiotic on the shelf is still effective. And it's a true battle in the hospitals and in the healthcare system to try to save the life of these people. So bees were kind of like overlooked, I guess, from that point of view, and they fell in between the cracks. And eventually, the Food and Drug Administration and other government agencies realized that, wait a second, even though they're not like big livestock, a lot of times I refer to them as micro livestock, they are still producing food, mainly honey, but also wax and propolis and all the other byproducts from a hive that enters the food chain. So they should they should be looked at under the same scrutiny as a chicken, as a cow. And therefore, it is now illegal for beekeepers to actually just randomly acquire antibiotic to treat their infected beehive with. So they have to go through a veterinarian now to get either a prescription or what is called a veterinary feed directive to add antibiotic in the food. And so basically, that triggers um, basically a forced cooperation of beekeepers with veterinarians, and there seems to be hesitation, and probably from both sides of the aisle. A lot of beekeepers, don't really see the need to suddenly be forced to involve a veterinarian in the stewardship of bees. On the other side, veterinarians feel themselves probably underprepared to adequately diagnose and treat a bacterial disease in a hive. So I think there is a potential for education on both sides, and hopefully on the long run, it's going to be a positive outcome for everybody involved.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that seems like there's a lot more information needed for both sides. And you can trace these antimicrobial resistances even in the honey. And how would
Oh
you
yeah,
test
oh
for
yeah.
that?
Yeah, there's certain publications that are out there, and so there's certain molecular analytic methods like gas spectrometroscopy and all the other uh, high tech analytical devices that basically each substance has basically kind of like, if you want to say, a fingerprint. And so if you send it through those machines that analyze it, they can actually detect that fingerprint and has a special curve. And then you can actually say, look, this honey has been contaminated with substance XYZ. That could also be a pesticide. This could be anything that bees collect from the outside, bring into the hive, but a lot of times it's medications that are it is actually applied directly into the hive.
Well, there's a lot of different types of bee species. Are there some species that are more prone to these types of infections and then ultimately having more bacteria that carry those multi-resistances?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So basically, when we talk about the bee industry and from an industrial, commercial, or point of view, we're just talking about one species, Apis mellifera, the Western honeybee, which originated, in the Central European, African region. There is way more bee species, and we have lots of native bees in the United States, for example. And you're familiar with those little sweat bees, with these hover bees, and with the bumblebees and all this stuff. So yeah, we have plenty of bee species. But when we talk about the honeybee, we usually refer just to one species, and this is the species that we can use to produce honey, even to the scale of industrial size. Farms that have thousands and thousands of hives that are a lot of times being transported around the country. So, for example, earlier this year, uh, probably close to 2 million hives were all transported to California to the almond pollination event. So almonds rely on the honeybee for pollination. And most of the times, plants, they are not exquisitely focused on just one pollinator species. There's like maybe a carpenter bee comes by, maybe a bumblebee comes by, maybe a sweat bee, a squash bee, whatever, and also the honeybee. However, almonds specifically require the honeybee for pollination. So that means that honeybees from all over the United States are being actually transported across the country, and to be in a very confined region of the almond groves in California. Then they stay there for a month or so, and then they are being moved somewhere else. They're moving back maybe to Florida to help with the orange pollination, maybe to New England, to cranberry, alfalfa in Montana or Dakota. So there is a frequent flyer map, so to say, of bees where they're being transported from a commercial point of view. And as you can imagine, being transported like this, being exposed to a monoculture. So just basically eating almond pollen for a couple of weeks and then being transported away across the country and then only eating blueberry pollen or something like this. That is very stressful for those animals. So it potentially decreases the immune system. And then, maybe they get a little bit sick. And then maybe just like with us, a bacterial disease that isn't not threatening per se, but once our immune system is decreased, suddenly we get a secondary infection, right? Suddenly we get
Mhm.
sick. And so it's the same thing for those girls working really hard, and then potentially get sick with diseases that sometimes they get rid of themselves, and sometimes it's just too much for them, and they need our help.
Mhm. And there's quite a lot of bee diseases, and there have been some emerging ones, new ones coming up that are sometimes challenging to diagnose. And how do you usually diagnose an infection in a beehive?
Yeah, that's a great question, and so I think this is an exciting moment to be able to work with you on that because historically it has been a little bit challenging. So the vast majority of diseases have been diagnosed in the past based on clinical signs. So a very experienced beekeepers, they're able to, I mean, jokingly, I say walk past the hive and already diagnose there's something going on, right? It's kind of like an experienced physician maybe look at the person, shake their hand and say, have you had your liver checked recently? Because it seems like maybe your liver. So it's kind of like one of those things that comes with experiences. And so, but however, as you can imagine, just looking at a colony, looking at certain patterns, opens up the possibility to not be that accurate or maybe miss certain things, especially in the very beginning when a disease takes over. So as a veterinarian, I'm always a fan, and I'm always trying to teach people to diagnose problems early on. So you need to be very fine tuned in into A, what does a normal organism look like? So be aware of what's normal, like how strong should a colony be in March or in April? And then how does that colony that I'm just looking at right now compare? As you can imagine, there's lots of different factors that could actually cause stress to the honeybee. So, and then potentially you have, as I mentioned before, a bacterial disease that has been maybe sitting there in the background, smoldering away, not really affecting them significantly. But then, maybe it hasn't rained for a while. Maybe it's too dry. Maybe they have a parasitic load that is abnormally high. So, and maybe they just visited a field where a lot of pesticides or herbicides are being sprayed. So you have these compounding factors, which then could potentially push those poor little girls over the edge, and they succumb to complications of a bacterial disease. But in addition, there were virus in the background, maybe there was pesticides in the background. So being able to accurately diagnose bacterial diseases and early on is really, really an important tool in managing an apiary successfully.
Mhm. And are there certain commensals that you're also looking for? I think the field of probiotics is quite popular for dogs and cats. Do you see any options for probiotic treatment for
Yes,
bees to give them
yes.
that little extra boost of strength to fight off an infection even?
Exactly. So, and that's a great question, and that's actually something that I'm just starting to look into. I just got some money from the Georgia Beekeeper Association to actually look at that, as I have documented that in a few individual cases here and there, where we actually diagnosed European foul brood with the help of your lab, and the recommended treatment to this day is that we use antibiotics. So usually tetracyclines are being used and sprinkled into the hive, and a lot of times that can fix the issue. It still probably takes about a month or something. This we need to repeat the application, but more and more papers are being published also on the detrimental effects of the antibiotics to the honeybee. As you can imagine, it really not just kills those evil bacteria that cause this disease, it kills a lot of beneficial bacteria that live in their gut and actually beneficial for the immune system of the bee. So it kind of cleans them out from that point of view. And then they need to reestablish the flora again from the beginning. For human medicine, we know from publications that if you have traveler's diarrhea and you take a whooping load of antibiotic orally to basically clean out your gut from that point of view, so there's some good evidence that it can take a very, very long time to reestablish your normal
Mhm.
bacteria, fauna again. And so more and more evidence is coming out that the bees are not very different. So my study, what I'm trying to do is actually trying to see, can we use this probiotics to just to outcompete the bad bacteria? So, for example, in the United States, it's one of those few countries where the use of antibiotics in the beehive is actually still legal and still okay, versus in Europe, where I'm from, it is actually completely illegal to use antibiotics in the beehive because of that problem that I mentioned earlier on, where residues of antibiotics can't be actually traced back into that final end product, honey, for example, and obviously people are not happy about that. So I always say to my American beekeeper friends and colleagues, it's like you have a tremendous benefit and luxury to be able to use those antibiotics here. So please use them carefully and sparingly instead of just sprinkling antibiotics into a hive whenever you feel like it, because that is one way to create antibiotic resistance for sure. And then the next step is the government is going to prohibit the complete use of antibiotics. So that's why monitoring them and again diagnosing those diseases early on is really important.
There Are there any vaccines for bees to prevent those kind of outbreaks?
Yeah, actually, there is a company called Dalan, Dalan, and that's actually the first company in the world that produced a vaccine for an invertebrate. Basically, until they showed it in studies and now conducting field trials, it was considered that it's kind of more or less impossible to vaccinate an invertebrate because they're missing that more advanced form of an immune system that the typical idea of a vaccine is based on. So usually, when you get vaccine as a mammal, when we get vaccinated, when we vaccinate our dog or a cat, the idea is that we use a protein, usually part of the virus or the bacteria, and it's being denaturized, and then we introduce this into the body, and so the body kind of like learns to cope with it and builds antibody against that specific protein. So when that pathogen, when that virus or the bacteria enters then the body, the immune system is primed already and can build a lot of antibodies and can neutralize that threat very early on. Because invertebrates don't produce antibodies, it was always considered that it's a waste of everybody's time to look at a vaccine because it's more primitive. And yet it turns out that you can approach it in the same way, and yet they experience something as immune priming. So basically, if you vaccinate the queen, and the vaccination is like our polio vaccine is being given orally. So you put it in the sugar candy that's being fed to the queen. Once she ingests that, it's very much the same. Her GI tract basically breaks these proteins down in smaller pieces. They enter her body. And then the cool thing is that that information is being passed on to every egg that she's going to lay. So that means that all of her babies are already at that heightened immune competent stage. And then in the lab situation, when those newbies were basically challenged with that potential deadly disease, they actually, a vast majority of them survived, showing a clear efficacy of the vaccine. And that's being tested now in field trials. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. Group mass vaccination with just vaccinating the bee. That's really great.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back a little bit to the microbiome studies that are being done on bees. I think you can even study the microbiome of honey, I've recently learned. And when you study the microbiome of your hives, what kind of sample do you take? Do you swab the hive itself? Do you collect it from the bee? And then bees have, I think, two stomachs. Do you analyze the microbiome of each stomach? Is it different, or do you just kind of just take a bee
Yeah.
and see what's on their skin in general? How do you even study it?
I know that's a really complex question, and I think I want to use an analogy kind of. Um, if somebody says, I wanna study what kind of bacteria we share our home with, where would you go to study this? Would you take a couple of swabs in the kitchen? Would you go to the bathroom and swab there? Would you go? So because most likely whatever you grow in the kitchen may be a little bit different than what you grow out of the bathroom or the living room, or whatever. So it's a little bit similar within the hive, because the hive is basically the house, and yet the hive is has, if you want to say, different compartments. So there's the brood nest, where the eggs are being laid, and then the larvae develop, and a new generation of bees develop. And so this is kind of like the equivalent of a womb in a mammal. And so ideally that situation should be close to sterile, as with most babies. The immune system is not super competent. So bees have developed a very intricate system of basically keeping that area sterile, more or less. So, and my focus is primarily to look at the microbiome of those developing larvae, because that is the next generation of the developing bees. That's really, really important. And so I want to see, how what is the baseline microbiome there, because again, that's really important, because if we have a disease like the name is European foul brood, American foul brood, so brood is already in the name, it affects the brood, it basically is a baby killer because the immune system is not that competent. So, and the way how those babies get affected is by the nurse bees who actually feed them. They will obviously carry it in their GI tract, and when they regurge food out for them, they will always then, when they're infected, also basically infect those little larvae with the bacteria. In the adult animal, in the adult bee, those bacteria don't cause any harm. So this is why it's called foul brood. It kills the babies. So this is why my personal interest is characterizing a little bit, looking at that microbiome of the womb, of what is back there normally. What does it look like with a normal developing larvae? And then, in addition, like the study that I'm just starting is, if we have confirmed cases of European foul brood, can we potentially rescue a situation with probiotic, which just basically introducing beneficial bacteria to literally outcompete the bad guys? And that's what I want to take a look a little bit, take a closer look at.
Mhm. Is there any advice you would give hobby beekeepers how they can prevent these outbreaks?
Yeah, that's oh man, I should deserve a Nobel Prize if I could come up with a great answer for that, right? So yeah, but we have to focus on prevention. So like I said, moving over to, for example, Europe, where I know that beekeepers from that point of view are a little bit on their own. So if they diagnose European foul brood in their hives, you know, they're not going to try to contact a veterinarian, because the veterinarian can't really prescribe the antibiotics. They can't really help them from that point of view. What they need to know, what they need to do, they need to potentially identify the stressor. I need to identify the cause. Why is my colony affected with European foul brood? So most of the time, something can be identified. Like I said before, maybe it's a drought. Maybe there's no, it didn't rain for a long time. There's no flowers to blossom, so they're starving a little bit. Maybe the humidity in the hive is either too high or too low. Maybe they have been, the immune system has been a little bit handicapped by a high parasitic load. And so on. So it basically is a game of a little bit detective, trying to find out, why is your colony succumbing to this? Why can't they fight through? Because to be honest, and again, this is why I love working with you, because not only do I get from the test results, not only do I get, yeah, it's positive and maybe 3 plus, no, I get a real number. I said, like in the test results coming from your lab, it tells me, oh, we had then 40,000 spores or 40 million spores, right? When I see a hive is infected by 40,000, that probably doesn't mean that that hive is diseased. The pathogen is there, but it should put me on a higher alert level. Say, hey, look, we got some pressure building up. There is European foul brood. If I don't do something, if I don't, it has the potential to take over. Versus the test results come back as 40 million, I know that potentially is a lost cause, and maybe even probiotics are not going to change help. Now I need to use antibiotic, but again, these are kind of questions that I'm hoping to answer with those real world life cases that I'm trying to sample now when a beekeeper diagnoses a European foul brood.
Hmm. And do you help other beekeepers? Is there an option for them to reach out to your laboratory or to you personally to get advice?
Yes, yes. I'm. Like I said, I just basically send a mass email out to our local beekeepers because I'm doing the study. I have very limited funds that cover probably 20 hives or something to examine. So, and that would involve me driving to the hive, me doing that inspection together. Once the beekeeper has a suspicion of it, they can email me. They should send me a couple of pictures once I confirm that this is a high suspect case. I will actually drive there. So it should be within 100 miles in the greater Athens area here in Georgia. So I'm happy to drive a couple hours there. Then I will take a sample, submit it to your lab, get results back. In the meantime, um, actually provide them with the probiotics for free. They will use the probiotic as intended by the manufacturer. And then within 2 weeks or within a month, I will actually travel back to that same hive, sample it again, and then hopefully get a number if we significantly reduced the pathogen, if it's even still present, if it's gone, or if we didn't make a difference. So that's a little study that we're doing, a regional study. So unfortunately, I can't hop on a plane and sample a hive in California or Ohio at the moment. I wish I would have that much money. That would be fun.
Well, it'd be great if you came over to California and see us. I do have one trivia question as I was reading up on this, and it says that bees recognize faces. So if you are feeding the bees in your backyard regularly, they start to get to know you. Is that true?
Yes, yes, that is it's amazing. It's like I always warn everybody. It's like be very careful. Once you start reading about bees, it's a dangerous rabbit hole that you can go down to because there's just so many amazing publications out there. And yes, it's true. It has been shown over and over that they actually can do that they can operate at that level that they so it's described as facial recognition, but I'm wondering if there's also other cues, like maybe your individual smell, maybe they recognize you and your smell, your body, your own personal body odor. It could be that the voice, that their sound. So this is why I tell everybody, talk to your bees, talk to your girls when you work them, because if you work them gently, they will remember that, and so a lot of the times when I work my bee yard, I always try to wear protective gear and some things. But here and there, you go on your bee yard and then you see something and you're like, okay, I quickly need to open that beehive. I need to just quickly look, and uh, and you get just like a farmer knows the livestock. After a while, you get to know your girls, and so it's like, oh, this hive is pretty docile. I can venture in and I can maybe take a peek without getting really stung if the environmental condition is right. On the contrary, I did actually a study a couple summers ago with one of my students where we had to collect venom from the bees. And so there's a little apparatus that if they land on it, it gives them, it's just basically powered by a AA battery, and it has little metal wires. And so the moment that they land on it, it gives them a little electroshock, and then they squirt a little bit of venom out, and then after a while you can collect it. So the nice thing about that is that the bee survives it, and it will and you can collect the honey, and but it really upsets them. And what happened to that student? They were, I think, recognizing that student and going after him. And so that was really funny. I just have to walk back because I need to plug in my computer as I'm getting a signal that my computer is dying if I don't do that in a second. So sorry for the moving
Wow, I
background.
would be upset
Yep.
too if your student electroshocked me.
I know,
I was
I
like,
know,
they
but I mean, it's
recognize it.
I always have to think about that episode because now when I read these papers and how they have the potential to recognize people, like that episode comes to mind. It's like they were specifically going after him in future inspection, even if we didn't do it. But somehow they remember this guy as being bad news, and they went after him. And I could stand next to him and didn't really get attacked to the same level that he did. So yes, bees are absolutely fascinating little creatures for sure.
Okay, well, better watch out then. Well,
Hmm.
is there?
Be kind to all the creatures, right?
Yes, definitely. Well, as we are getting to the end of our interview, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Is there anything you'd like people to know what we can do for the bees? You hear about the bee dying everywhere, and is there something you would like to?
Yeah, so I mean, I think so. What I'm in the midst about is like I want to create a club here in Georgia, and hopefully that could be a nationwide movement. I'm going to call it a 10%er club. So if you have a lawn at home, if you have a garden and you mow the lawn or whatever, think about just setting 10% of it aside. That could be the area really close to your neighbor that you're probably not hanging out too much anyway, next to a fence. But why don't we dedicate just 10% of our fun lawn area that is, if you look at it from a bee's point of view, that is completely useless. It would be the equivalent to a desert because like a lawn has nothing to offer for a pollinator, absolutely nothing. So this is why I'm kind of like, think about it next time you go out on your lawn and say, hey, could I set like a side strip or a bank or somewhere? Could I let the wildflowers just take over and stop mowing there? I think that would make a big, big difference. And there's some statistics out there which is mind-boggling. If people would convert, I want to say 50% of their lawns or of their backyards into pollinator garden, I think it would basically be equivalent to an area of pollinator friendly surface area that would be the same area than all national parks combined in the United States. So it's an amazing statistic, but it just tells you it's like, oh, everybody can contribute to a little bit and everybody can do their share without spending a huge amount of money. It actually saves you some time. Mow 10% less and let the wildflowers grow. And then you're helping also the native bees and all the other pollinators. So it's not just about the honeybee, it's all about the pollinators in general. So that would be huge help.
Okay, let's all become 10 percenters. I think that seems quite achievable.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today. I think I've learned a lot. It's quite fascinating. And yeah, if anyone wants to donate to the cause, we will add the link at the bottom. And yeah,
Thank you.
I hope you have a great weekend and talk more soon.
You too. Okay. And thanks for all you do to help us be better doctors.
Oh, thank you. We're happy to. Take care.
Okay.
Bye, Jörg.
Bye.